Welcome back. So I mentioned that psychologists often disagree about how to approach life. And we talked about it in that first video, the big debates, nature versus nurture, conscious versus unconscious, and things like that. So we're going to get into a few minutes of the psych perspective. So the different ways that psychologists approach problems. And this is really going to form the backbone of the class. So of of all the videos I'm posting today, this is probably the most important one. And it goes along with the slides that, starting with the psychodynamic perspective all the way through the end. So this is going to be a little longer video. That's why, watch it for homework. So, psychodynamic perspective, Sigmund Freud. I guess in order to understand Freud completely, you have to understand the context that he grew up in. Okay, as the time he's writing in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Europe, you have a very closed society, and it's very puritanical, meaning very strict, and sex is evil, and women shouldn't show their ankles, and things like that. And at the same time, all this is happening, we have World War One, and we have atrocities that the world has never seen. So Freud tries to explain why we can have such a tightwad society where everything is wrong and evil and sinful, but still have these huge world wars. And he explains it partially because he thinks that all of us inside, we have what's called the unconscious. So the psychodynamic perspective emphasizes the unconscious. And your unconscious mind isn't the same as your conscious mind. Your conscious mind is hopefully thinking things like, I should write this down, or I should pay attention to the video. But your unconscious mind, especially the part of the unconscious mind we'll talk about in February, called the id, wants you to go to sleep or play video games or leave the house and go get some, I don't know, Monster Energy drink at Speedway. The idea is that their unconscious mind has all these urges and desires that it wants to accomplish, and the conscious mind, particularly what Freud called the ego and superego, have to keep that in check. And so that your personality is really shaped by this war between the conscious and the unconscious. And, some of the things that Freud did to explore the unconscious were things like studying dreams. And that's something we'll get to a little later on in the semester. The idea that your dreams could have a deeper meaning. So the dream you had last night about playing with a dog, Freud would be all about, well, what did that symbolize? What does the dog symbolize? What does that mean about your larger life? Another way to study it, free association, where what Freud would do is he'd take patients and have them lie on a couch, it's kind of the traditional psychologist setting, and just have them talk about your problems, talk about your feelings, talk, and eventually you get to the bottom of it by listening for Freudian slips, unconscious little tricks here and there. Try to explore the unconscious. But the whole idea is that you've had all this stuff happen to you in your life, the way your parents raised you, maybe embarrassing things that happen to you at school, and a lot of that gets stored in your unconscious, and then it comes out in weird ways. Sometimes your dreams, sometimes weird free associations. But the idea is the unconscious is what shapes who you are. So the struggle between what you actually want to do, what your id's telling you to do, and perhaps what society wants you to do really shapes your personality. So unconscious, all that stuff underneath the surface that maybe you don't even know about, shapes who you are. That's the unconscious perspective. The next one, behaviorism. Behaviorism evolves as a reaction to the psychodynamic perspective. So the psychodynamic perspective is probably the least one of the least scientific perspectives out there. There's no scientific experiments to prove it. Basically, Freud said, oh yeah, the unconscious is there. It just is. Yeah, you can't prove that it isn't. And people had to sit with that. Behaviorism is really a reaction to that, because behaviorism is all about focusing on what you can see. The unconscious is everything you can't see. Behaviorism is, we're going to look at observable behaviors. We're going to focus on what people actually do, and we're not going to worry about how they think about it in their unconscious or even their conscious. What people do is what matters. And so they're looking at how do we how do we do the things that we do? How do we learn how to do the things we do? So things like conditioning and learning come up a lot in behaviorism. And some of the more famous experiments, Ivan Pavlov's experiment involving dogs, which you may have heard of in a different class. He was the guy who, you give a dog food and they're going to start salivating because food is delicious. Okay, so the dog, if you have a dog, like my old dog used to just get drooled as dribbling out of his mouth all the way to the ground. If you have that's a natural response. No learning has taken place. But what Pavlov did was to let the dogs know that the food was coming. Rings the bell. Ding, 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 ding. Ring the bell, present the food. Ring the bell, present the food. Each time the dog would salivate. Eventually, just by ringing the bell, the dog would start salivating because they knew food was coming. That's conditioning, or what he calls classical conditioning. John Watson had a similar experiment, a lot less ethical, and it didn't involve fun dogs. He took a little baby named Albert, and he said, I can make this little baby afraid of everything or anything. So gave him a little white rat. Normally kids like white fuzzy things. So, as he's petting the rat, boom! Loud noise behind his head. Tries to pet the rat again, boom! Loud noise behind his head. Eventually, little Albert learned, the white rat means there's going to be a loud noise, and little kids don't like loud noises. It startles them. And so he'd start crying. He was conditioned. He learned that behavior. And then there's a lot of other things Watson taught him to be afraid of. We'll learn about that in November. B.F. Skinner was all about rewards and punishments, reinforcements and punishments. He believed in what he called operant conditioning. The idea that if I if I reinforce a behavior, you're more likely to do it in the future. So if you participate in class, I had an English professor in college who carried around a bag of Hershey's Kisses. And if you participated in class, he would throw a Hershey's Kiss at you, kind of like Michael Scott when he tried to throw candy at people in the business school episode of The Office, except in this case, the professor worked. People were more likely to participate because they liked candy. Who doesn't like candy? Punishment, on the other hand, well, if the professor of literature that I had, say, tased us when we raised our hands, well, we were less likely to participate in the future. So behaviorism focuses on observable behaviors, how we learn them through classical conditioning, operant conditioning, things like that. The next perspective, probably one of the more controversial ones, is evolutionary psychology, evolutionary perspective. And Charles Darwin is not a psychologist, but you know him from the theory of evolution and the idea, basically the ideas of natural selection. Okay, that animals are going to pass traits to the next generation that help that next generation survive. So if we're looking at, a really tall giraffe, it's likely to survive because it can reach the top of the trees and eat those leaves. It's going to have children because as an adaptive trait, it's going to have children that have long necks too. In the same way, tall people, like Mr. Gallagher is 6'8", his daughters are probably going to be taller than me. Okay, probably taller than 6 feet tall. It's a trait you pass on. Way it applies to psychology has to do with behavior. Okay, and the idea that we inherit behaviors that help us survive. Okay, so I'll give you an example. A man with big muscles, probably, we'll say stereotypically attractive. Okay, and evolutionary psychologists would look at that, okay, why are we as people attracted to a guy with big muscles? What draws us to him? An evolutionary psychologist points to how that would have helped us survive. So if you decide to link up with a muscle-bound man back in the cave people days, you're probably more likely to be safe from saber-toothed tigers because that muscle-bound man can fight off the saber-toothed tigers and he can hunt woolly mammoths and bring back food so that not only you can survive, but probably most importantly, your children, your offspring can survive. And the whole idea of evolutionary psychology, it really treats us no different than animals. The purpose of our lives is to reproduce, okay, and make sure that our genes survive into the next generation. So the idea of applying this theory to psychology means that the things that we do, behaviors we have are designed for that. We're hoping to pass our genes on to the next generation. So you would find a big, strong man to go out with because that guy could protect you from bears and Battlestar Galactica. and things like that. That's the essence of evolutionary psychology. Kind of controversial because we like thinking of ourselves as higher minded individuals that aren't just base evolutionary behaviors. And we'll talk about it more hopefully in person as it comes up. But it's definitely one of those. We don't like to think that our entire existence revolves around procreation. I like to think there's more to it than that. The biological perspective is different from evolution. Evolutionary is just looking at our behaviors. Did we inherit these through natural selection, things like that. Biopsychological perspective really focuses on your brain and all the chemicals going in your body at any given time. How does that influence your behavior? So, it says in the PowerPoint slide, psychological effects of hormones. Like, for instance, maybe somebody with too much testosterone is a little aggressive. Genes, this, again, it's different than evolutionary psychology because we're talking about natural selection here. Here, we're just talking about genetic predispositions. Okay, maybe you inherit certain dispositions from your parents. Okay, whether it's being shy or being aggressive, being angry, those are all things that could be influenced by biopsychology. And the nervous system, what's going on in your brain? What's going on with these little chemicals called neurotransmitters? A biopsychologist believes depression is not caused by traumatic events in your life or underlying unconscious issues. A biopsychologist believes that it's because not enough serotonin. We fix that chemical, we can fix your depression. So the idea of biopsychology is really very, medically based, I guess you could say. It's kind of the medical model that any behavioral issues or psychological issues we can solve with biological solutions. Next one, gestalt psychology, and if you look at the PowerPoint goes along with this, there's the famous gold dress, blue dress controversy. I always saw it as the gold dress. It really giveaway for Gestalt psychology is if you ever see a German name, it's almost always somebody involved in Gestalt psychology, and they focus on sensation and perception, and how we can look at things like the gold dress, blue dress, or there was the controversy a couple years ago. It was YouTube or like an audio clip that some people heard Yanni and some people heard Laurel. That's all stuff that Gestalt psychologists would talk about. They talk about how we bring all these individual bits of information, the parts, into a whole. And the idea that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. How do we take little bits of data, put them all together? So we talk about taste, for instance. When you're eating something kind of exotic, I don't know, some kind of dish with lots of different ingredients, you taste all the individual ingredients, but you incorporate them into a whole, and you're like, wow, this Popeye's chicken sandwich is really, really good. That's Gestalt psychology. Humanistic perspective, I'm okay, you're okay, we're all okay. You're trying to be the best version of yourself. And so humanistic psychologists believe that who we are is shaped by our striving to reach our potential, or what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization. Each of us are trying to be the best version of ourselves, and that's what we should focus on. It's kind of the self-help type of psychology that you want to be the best version of yourself, becoming a better you, like Chicken Soup for the Soul books often go along the humanistic path. Cognitive perspective is all about thinking. So when you see the word cognitive, you think, how do I process information? How do I memorize information? How do I interpret information? Cognitive is all about thinking. And how we interpret things could definitely play a role. So for instance, if I'm in a bad mood and I see a friend walk down the hall, Mr. Gallagher, and I wave and he blows me off, if I'm in a bad mood, I might interpret that as, oh, he hates me, he wishes I was dead. On the other hand, if I'm in a happy mood, well, maybe he didn't see me. The way I interpret, the way I think about what just happened influences my emotions, influences my behavior. And then finally, the last slide before I run out the clock here on Screencast-O-Matic, sociocultural perspective. How does race affect the way we think and behave? Does it? How does gender? How does ethnicity, culture? All of those things, how does that influence our behavior and the way we treat other people? So those are some of the perspectives. I'll give you a worksheet on Wednesday that we're going to go over in class that'll help cement these even more. Take care.